Hello, everyone. Good to see you. I've decided that I should give you a lecture tonight, which is something that's local to us here, but so many people are trying to deal with the issue of the fires in LA that I would like to talk about those fires in terms of the Dasabhumika Sutra. And I hope that it can be applicable to many things and that you'll forgive me for being so local in, in what I'm about to say. I went through social media and I asked and looked for what people were saying about the fact that an entire city has burned. And it's a city that is one that I have lived in, and that in the burning of that city, it destroyed my sister's home and everything in it, including some of my own things. And we are still facing it. So people said things like a, a place that was once so familiar and felt so safe, completely upended. It's just so devastating. I didn't think this was going to happen. It's it's really weird coming back to somewhere that does not exist anymore. And that's really true. I looked at pictures today. I looked at pictures of where I go to the dentist, and it's simply not there. And I looked at a place where one of my favorite restaurants, and it's not there. And somebody said Mars would be more habitable than this place right now. There's absolutely nothing. And it covers acres and acres of nothing. So the situation is described as absolutely unthinkable. And people who fled from the fire, including my sister, so I just left. I had only time to take my purse and drove away. Many people have said to me, I felt like I had lost a part of myself. And when I look in the sutra, and I started working with the sutra to say, here's what I want to do. I don't know what words to say about this tragedy. It's so complete. It's so awful. I don't even know how to use words. So I decided instead that I would use it in this class. I would go look in the Dasabhumika Sutra and see if it could help me. When I look at the Dasabhumika Sutra, I realize that what I'm looking at is an ancient text that quotes ancient material. It's a double agent. It's dealing with material that comes from maybe as early as the 6th century BCE. And here we are, 2025. So I'm looking back and asking this very ancient material about ancient material to help me explain and deal with this. People who were there and who witnessed it, because it was at times 100-mile-an-hour wind blowing, say it's the most unbelievable fire I have ever seen. And I went back and I looked at history, the fires in which cities have been burned outside of a war, going back to 64 when Rome burned. London burned in the 13th century and again in the 17th. Chicago, famous fire in our country. San Francisco, of course, in the 1906 earthquake. And now Pacific Palisades, the city that I lived in, which has now burned and has, for all practical purposes, practically been wiped out, as you can see in the picture there. Just street after street with all the homes gone. But what does the Sutra tell us? First of all, it says a bodhisattva completely understands the nature and potential of the four elements: earth, water, fire, and wind. And he's also very skilled at dealing with the good and bad features of the physical. In other words, the sutra says, you've come to the right place. I'm dealing with the fact that we are dealing with the four elements. We're dealing with physical elements. And all beings, it says in the sutra, abide in the prison of a worldly existence in which they are subjected to so much anguishing affliction. And they always embrace love and hate, and they produce worries and fears for themselves. Now, the four elements. The Buddhist text, this Dasabhumika, says four elements are like a poisonous snake. They're dangerous. They're potentially lethal. They can strike at any time. They can destroy. These are words out of a sutra that's saying earth, the wind is one of the elements. But wind can be completely destructive. It can be a hurricane. It can be a tornado. It is not a place where you can say, it's a gentle wind that blows, that cools my fevered brow. Wind can be extremely destructive. So can water. Floods. Floods are some of the most destructive things that hit people. And floods are usually often flash floods, unexpected. And the earth, with an earthquake like this one in Alaska, the earth itself can be very destructive. And of course, fire, which is what I'm talking about tonight. The fires that rage, that burn a town, that burn everybody's home, that burn everything you have, that leaves behind simply ashes. So Sutra says, now we turn from the physical to the spiritual and the emotional. He, a bodhisattva, contemplates everything, and he sees that everything is like a grave disease. Everything that we have existing around us has the potential to cause us worry, for us to cry about, to lament. We are constantly, says the Sutra, ablaze with the fierce fire of the three poisons that from beginningless time onward have, without ever having of stop, been a problem. So says the Sutra, all existing things, every existing thing brings us worry and sorrow. And we can't stop accumulating them. It's such a problem. When everything burns and you lose everything, what do? You start accumulating right away. The first thing you do is to go shopping. You go out and start buying it again. You start filling it again. We ceaselessly accumulate things. We just can't stop. And these things that we accumulate are always ablaze with the three poisons: desire, hatred, and illusion, if you will. And the things that we acquire are all subject to so many kinds of calamities. But it's not just calamities. We know that everything is possessed of the certainty of being destroyed, that everything has an inability to endure for very long. And we forget that. It's so easy to get a new car and to look at it and be so attached to it when we know eventually it will be like these cars here. It will join them. And what do I do when I'm faced with the fact that I am so attached to those things which don't last, which are bound to disappear, which are burning up right at this moment in front of me? It is this attachment. And I say this because when we have seen what happened with this terrible fire in our city here, the attachment that we all had to the things which had been destroyed, causing us, a whole city, to be in depression and lamenting and stunned and almost unable to even move to figure out what to do about it. The sutra says you have to remember that all existing things are tied up with worry, lamentation, suffering, and anguish, because they can be like this beautiful glass vase. They're subject to falling on the floor and being smashed and being destroyed. We have to keep in mind that this is the case for all living, existing things that are around us, living and inert. So the sutra says that a bodhisattva sees that everything is like a sickness, it's like a sore, and that we are bound up in this love obsessed feeling that we have for our things, that our very existence is only one of being burned up by the fierce fires of the three poisons. This all is, and this sutra is saying to us, you need to be fully aware of the real state of how things are, that elements are dangerous, that nature is not something to play around with, that you don't want to be able to say, as some people have, they will not evacuate. I don't have to be in the face of elements. I don't have to deal with them. I can handle it. I can control it. And with the elements, we have no control. There are times when it is simply out of our control. And that's what we've just faced here in Los Angeles. The element of fire has been out of our control. And the 100-mile-an-hour wind that blew it and caused it to burn so much, out of our control. We are having to deal with the fact that we live with nature, which is not ours to control. We are not in control of it. Now, a bodhisattva feels pity for beings, feels pity for all of us, because in one sense, we are all alone. There's no one to rely on to protect us from the elements. There's no one at times that can rescue us. And when this thing, terrible thing happened here, people were not ready. They had not thought, they had not kept in mind that we are alone and we have no one who we can rely on to rescue and protect us in the face of the strength of nature. That's something we have always to face. But the sutra says a bodhisattva has great compassion for all of us, I would say. And he uses his compassion because he wishes to prevent us from encountering disasters. It's a very practical statement. The sutra is saying you ought to really understand the elements. You ought to understand wind and water and earth and all the elements. You need to understand the nature of the world. And it is only by understanding the nature of the world that he can find ways to prevent us from encountering such disasters. Preparation, if you will. But more than preparation, understanding. Understanding that when the floods come or when the fire comes, it's not wisdom to stand there and face it. It's not wise to stay in one's home, as people did. And some died by staying in their home thinking they could protect it. The Buddhists are saying, number one, be realistic. That's what the sutra to me says. Be realistic. Understand what we face. And understand that our attachment to things, our love for our things, and we do have it. And that this attachment which we have is something which can cause us to have great danger because we're so attached that we don't even protect ourselves. We don't even walk away from it without trying somehow to control it. I think that I've learned a lot from this fire. It's told me that I can read the Buddhist texts, but even reading them, I've had to be taught. And this has happened to me in all sorts of ways. Ill health had to teach me the nature of my body and what I have to accept about it. And the fire says, I have to accept that no matter how I love the place that I'm living, there's no control that's so great that I'm guaranteed forever. In other words, we live in an ever-changing world. So the sutra says that we're often like blind people with no guide, and we don't know what we are doing is not a path of escape. But I think that it is. How often in my blindness I feel that I can follow desire, that I can follow attachment, and that is a path that's open to me. But that attachment and the path which I am following when I do that is, in a sense, like a blind man. I'm going to have to face that what I took to be the case is not the case. And if it's not the case, then I have to make sure, to the degree that I can, how can I know the nature of the world? How can I know the nature of myself and how important that is? So it says death. We're all, when we've come face to face with death and someone that we love dies, the separation that occurs at the moment of their dying brings about agitation and depression of the heart. And it's not to say that we shouldn't grieve, but if we understand the nature of things, at least we know that what has happened is not just some freakish thing that happened without a cause. As the Buddhists always say, there's a cause for everything. There are the conditions that make that cause arise. And when they arise and when they occur, then that's the time, if possible, to be ready to deal with what happens after that event. I've often used the imagery of having a flat tire in the parking lot of a mall, going out after shopping and finding that, oh no, I've got a flat tire. And how long do we kick it? How long do we stand there? And how long do we say, oh, how could this happen today of all days? Why does this happen to me? What evil omen is it that's brought about this flat tire? No, say the Buddhists, that doesn't help you. That really doesn't help you. If you need to do it, you do it. But what you eventually have to do is to fix the flat tire. You just have to change it. So why not start doing that right away? Why go through what we often go through, moaning and groaning and asking why something happened, is to simply deal with the fact that it has happened. It's like this fire. In one sense, at one point, one simply has to say, it happened. It has happened. Everything is gone. All the things that I cherished, they're gone. There is a point where you have to say, that's the reality. And then say, what do I do now? What is it that I do? Well, from the Dasabhumika point of view, they say in this sutra that what we all look for is to be free from attachments, to be free from attachments which cause us to be sorrowful, to be sad. And how do you get rid of these attachments? Bodhisattva lives without fear. And how does it do that? Because there is no covetous attachment to a self or to the things that we think belong to us. That he's able, or bodhisattvas are able to abandon all forms of fearfulness. You have to smile when you think about how often we speak as if we own things. This is, I'm waiting for my bus. And we say, I'm waiting for my train. It's not my bus. It's not my train. It is a momentary situation. The American Aboriginals had and still have the strong sense you don't own the earth. You don't own any piece of it. You can't have a document that says you own this. Well, how long are you going to live? Very few people who are owning their land at this moment will own it for more than at least 50 years in most cases. We don't own it. And we have to realize that even though we live and we feel we have control of a piece of property, that it really, the property is not ours in the sense that it will stay with us no matter what. We will all have to abandon. And so when we abandon our houses in this fire, it's not as if we had ownership of something that guaranteed it to be ours for eternity. It was just borrowed time anyway. But when we see someone, we we have compassion. The Bodhisattva had compassion. When we perceive that the world is fiercely ablaze, metaphorically with desire, hatred, and illusion, it's but that kind of compassion says we can utterly transcend all thoughts, all kinds of thoughts, and bring forth great compassion and the power of vigor. So the text says, how important is this Buddhist teaching to us? Well, the text says, and the people who put it together, even if it was the biggest fire of the cosmos, I would be willing, says the writer or the people who put the text together, to jump into it in order to have the understanding and the insights. So if I would be willing to do that, says Bodhisattva, I'm not going to shrink from becoming and dealing with human suffering. I can do it. I can do it for the sake of others. It's like parents. There are times when we have to watch our children suffer, and it's very painful. And we wish we didn't have to do it, but yet we do. We don't shrink from human suffering. We stay with our child. We stay with our friends. We stay with other people. We stay with those around us. So it is with the roots of goodness that a bodhisattva uses his roots of goodness to extinguish the blazing fire of affliction, which are burning in many hundreds of thousands of beings. It's not just those people who lost their homes here in Los Angeles. The sutra says this blazing fires of affliction are affecting hundreds of thousands of beings right at this moment. They are suffering. They are suffering. And so the bodhisattva is one who tries to extinguish the fires that are causing such terrible pain. Now, we do crave things. We do desire things. And craving or desire has two functions, said the sutra. First of all, it's attached to whatever circumstances we think are desirable. In other words, we're attached to things which we have defined, which we have given meaning to. And because we have done this, because we are having this attachment to circumstances or to things where we have attributed to them those aspects which we think are very important, that we grasp onto them. And that's how our brain works in a way. It works exactly the way the sutra says here. So that if I project onto something attributes or characteristics, then I want it, not because of the way it really is, but I want it because I have covered it with my own desires, my own wishes for how it would be, how it could be. And that leaves us in an unenviable position because then we grasp for the way in which we have constructed it, not the way it is. We crave and we grasp for things the way we have created and defined them within our own consciousness. What says the Sutra? Every existing thing is like empty space. Every existing thing is like empty space. And what does that mean? It means that all existing things appear to us to have a nature that's not really there. We see that something which we love, we think, has the nature of permanence, and it will last for our whole lifetime. But that's not really the nature that it has. I love a stone. One of the stones that I love is opal. I think that opal is one of the most beautiful of all the gems. But opal is I think, a Buddhist stone. It's a Buddhist stone because an opal is primarily showing us color, not because it's got the color in it. There's nothing in there to make that color. It has the structure that reflects light, that we see green and blue and all the myriad of colors in wonderful, wonderful reflections. But if you, as people used to do, they would try to cut the stone open to find out if they could see the chemical or the mineral that was causing the color. But opal is just silica. It's just sand, basically. It's silica. It has no color. The color is only made by the structure of the physical molecules. And it shows me these beautiful things, and I prize it for them. But what am I prizing? I'm not prizing it because it's got the mineral that makes that color. The real suffering then comes to us because we are unable to escape from an attachment to what is empty and false. So you look at this drawing, it's impossible. Nothing on earth could be made like this. You cannot make it. It's an illusory drawing, and you can never escape from it, that fact. We are attached to what is empty and false. This is especially true with color. For example, when I first learned that there is no yellow color in nature, I was stunned. What do you mean there's no yellow? I say, I see a lemon. But yellow is not one of the primary colors all colors are made up of the primary colors, and yellow is simply a place where the wavelength is between green and red. But there's no yellow. So I look at all of you on this. I see a red shirt, and I see the venerable with his robes, and I see color. But of course, all that color is simply that we have added minerals to that cloth which reflect light in such a way that that's what I see. So if we don't have yellow, and yet I see it all around me, what do you mean we don't have yellow? Here it is. It's yellow. I tell you, it's yellow. I cannot let go of something which is not real. It's so real to me that I hold on. So when you tell somebody, don't be attached to whatever it is, it's the same as saying to us, don't be attached to yellow. But I am attached to yellow. I like yellow. I think it's beautiful. and but I have to recognize that what I'm seeing is something which is brought about by the primary colors of blue, green, and red. And that's what I'm looking at. In the world in which we live today, we're faced with this in a very, very important way. For example, here's an image. No such person has ever existed. The AI, the artificial intelligence, constructed this from a word where I said, show me a young woman. And this is what it showed me. But it's constructed entirely of pixels. It is not a photograph. There was never such a person that ever lived. And so if I destroy this photograph, it's not as if there was ever anybody who was like that. I just am destroying pixels. But it's so attractive. It draws us in. We attribute all kinds of things to an image, regardless of what its reality is. We just deal with this in our life every day. We are constantly dealing with things as we wish they were. So, what does the Sutra tell us about letting go of our attachments? How do we deal with this? How in the world can I become detached and not arrogant, isolated, selfish? The text says, the root of suffering is attachment. And we need to hear that over and over. That the root of our suffering and the strength of our suffering has to do with our attachments. Because the more attached we are to something which is not what we think it is, the more we're going to suffer. But what does a bodhisattva do? First, the bodhisattva abandons attachment to a lifespan. How long am I going to live? Abandons attachment to things that we perceive as having desirable characteristics, but things that may not have those characteristics. That's just how we perceive them. And that things which arise and disappear that are just in reliance on our thoughts. We are faced with this attachment to what is not really the case. So if conceiving of a self, of things that are possessed by ourselves, attachments to an experience based on our senses, Bodhisattva abandons them all. Abandons is what the word that the sutra uses. Not just gives them up, he abandons them, leaves them by the road. So, as the sutra says, suffering and pain exist when we are unable to take out the arrows of pride or to extinguish the fires of the three poisons of desire, of hatred, anger, and delusion. When we're unable to destroy the darkness of ignorance, and therefore unable to dry up the great sea of desire. True reality transcends all attachments, reaches beyond the path of words, say the sutra. And so a bodhisattva feels the compassion and wishes to serve and to help others. And how do you do this? Even if you have extinguished the fire's afflictions, even if we have been able, I'm not one of them, but there are some people, enlightened people, who have attained the ability to snuff out the fires of the three poisons. And yet you still turn and say, I have to help. I have to help others. I have to help. I have to figure out how to cultivate the things which lead to liberation. That's my chore in life. So, what is the final achievement that the text talks about? What is it if you come through a great fire and you lose everything and you recognize finally your attachments and you realize that the things to which you are attached were carrying characteristics which we have attributed to them that were not really part of their nature? What is the final achievement which you want from this experience? And the sutra says, you must abandon all forms of fearfulness. And when you do, what we are left with is courage. The courage to keep on, the courage to rebuild, the courage to help others, the courage to be really honest with ourselves, the courage to face what is really the case. Courage. I think that as I end this lecture about the great fires of LA, that the people who come through it and who learn from it are those who have given up fear and have replaced it with courage. Thank you very much. I'll turn this back over to Chris. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lancaster. Which poignant talk right now. I'm turning to this sutra at this time. It's very valuable, insightful. I really appreciated hearing, using our class material in this way. Such an immediate need. I'd like to open the floor up to questions, thoughts, reflections on what we've just heard.
Yeah, that's the question.
Please go ahead.
As I have hear what you're talking about the bodhisattvas. Actually, I think probably because in my tradition we learn about bodhisattva, but the bodhisattva is just like normal people. And then I'm not pretty sure about the Mahayana traditions about the bodhisattvas. Like over here in the slide, you say that bodhisattva living without fear. It is because they have no covetous attachment to a self or to anything belong to a self, that they abandon all form of fearfulness. So I want you to clarify for sure, like the bodhisattva in the Mahayana teaching. Is it same or different from Theravada?
Yes, I get your point.
Okay.
It's both the same and different. A bodhisattva in the Theravada tradition, of course, the former lives of the Buddha mainly, in the Jataka tales. The Buddha has lived many lifetimes, and in those lifetimes, he's been called a bodhisattva. He was striving to move on to higher levels, and it took many lifetimes. It took a very, very long time for him to achieve final thing under the Bodhi tree of enlightenment while he was still alive. He's no longer called a bodhisattva from that point forward. The Theravada tradition breaks that. In the Mahayana, the further Buddhist development, and that it is not necessarily that anything is, it's not settled. It's not, the Buddhists keep on talking, the Buddhists keep on developing, but they came up with this idea that a person who achieves such an understanding with compassion would have to remain, would have to be reborn. And that this this person who has to be reborn because there's so much suffering, and that their enlightenment should not be used as a way out, but in a sense as a way in to the lives of people. And this became a real part of one aspect of Buddhism. And that's what this sutra refers to, is that shift in the Bodhisattva tradition. It wasn't that they discounted the previous. They say, yes, the Buddha was a bodhisattva for a long time. And the bodhisattva learned something in every lifetime, and a little bit and a little bit, and it accumulates until finally there comes enlightenment. So thank you for your question. I hope that gives you some feeling for this.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor. Very clear.
Good. Thank you. Reverend Kanjan, I see your hand up.
Yes, I wanted to ask about the period in which this was taught during the Buddha's life, or that they attribute it to. Which set of sutras? Is it the early Mahayana, like Prajna sutras, or?
Yeah. This sutra was put together with a whole group of other sutras. And they gave the name Avatamsaka to the whole set of collation when they combined them all. And yet the Dasabhumika existed outside of that collation. And it was first translated into into Chinese by Kumarajiva in the 5th century. So it's in a sense you could say, well, that's pretty late because that's 1,000 years after the life of the Buddha. But that is when it happened. That's when the translation into Chinese. Now that doesn't tell us when it was collated in India as a separate text, which I think it was, because otherwise Kumarajiva would not have received it as a particularly separated sutra and translated it as such. So it has a long history and an interesting one. I don't know if that answers your questions.
Oh, it was part of the Avatamsaka Sutra set, but then it was you saying it was separate. I understand. That was answering my question. And then the other part was especially about the elements at the very beginning. It reminds me of a passage from Master Tiantai, in which not only the elements are seen outside, but as dragons, serpents fighting each other inside our own selves, constantly trying to, cause disharmony, etc. So that was a correlation that immediately came up in my mind at the beginning. So thank you. That was very interesting to find another sutra with that. Thank you.
Well, what you just described, thank you. That's a wonderful example of, in a way, of what I've been trying to deal with. Thanks so much. It's good. Michelle.
Hi there.
uh,
I just wanted to comment that I think that tonight's lecture was really poignant, because all of us in the LA area are like suffering in some way due to the fires. So this was like a really timely discussion. Um, of course, I used to live in Florida as well, so I've dealt with hurricanes. And the first night of the fires, obviously, I didn't know that the fires were occurring yet, but I heard the winds and I could hear that it was hurricane force winds because it's the same sound that I've heard many times before when I was sheltering. And I was surprised to hear that sound in LA. And then, of course, we had the aftermath of it. And because of the fires, I also feel less attached to living in Los Angeles. And I've had that attachment for the nearly 9 years that I've been here. And I've never thought that, even though I've like had contemplations of like potentially living in Asia for 3 years, it's just like a number that's kind of been in my mind 3 years. I'm have felt like really attached to LA. So I'm like, well, I don't know how I'm gonna end up leaving. But suddenly the fires arose and I was sheltering in San Diego. And while I was there, I actually visited Shifang Temple with Sunny, who happened to be in town as well. And I found out about the program that Foguanshan has, and where you can actually volunteer at the different temples. So that's how I'm going to go to Taiwan in a few months and uh, deal with my attachment. Who knows? Maybe I'll stay much longer.
Well, I think all of us here are faced with the aftermath. We're still struggling to figure out um, what we're going to do with what's happened and how it affects us and what the future will be. And my sister has moved into a high-rise home for assisted living. And when I look out of the high-rise that she's in across the city,
Mhm.
and the part that she sees is untouched. It's the LA of the past. And I realized, but there it is. There's still a there.
Yes. Does she have any children locally?
Not locally, no.
Uh, okay.
So, but I understand what you've said. I hope that you have a really, I think you'll enjoy being at Foganchan. If you go to Taiwan, it's a wonderful place to be. It's a wonderful country. I always enjoy it. And I think you will too.
Thank you. That's the hope.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Genshin.
Yeah, so I just had breakfast with my middle class mates. So we just discussed about the disaster like flood, the fire in LA, and fire in my hometown last year, and some explosion in China, some city. And I'm really surprised and I'm really happy that to see that today our class is talking about the LA fire and the Dasabhumika. And I had a question because in Mahayana tradition, we pray for Bodhisattva, and we think that arhats, they just keep taking care of themselves, but Bodhisattva always have compassion to stay in the world to save the sentient beings. But there's always a question, like we were asking, that whether Bodhisattva, because they have compassion, they still keep to saving people, but does also that mean that they still have attachment for saving people or attachment to have compassion? And also the other question is like in Dasabhumika, when the Bodhisattva reaches 7 bhumi, then they can have no regrets. But does that mean that the Bodhisattva under the second bhumi, they still have some attachment or they still not be stable because they will be possible to regret someday. So that's some question always in my mind, because it seems to also be dangerous for bodhisattva if they don't reach seven bhumi, and they still have some danger to falling down to the ground and to maybe to falling down to the watery earth. So that's my question. Maybe Professor can give us some knowledge insight to how to give handle this bodhisattva bhumi, regress, and attachment for compassion. That's my question.
Well, I'll refer to some things I think I've already discussed a little bit in a former class, but if you think that the text is taught that you have to wait till you're perfect, that you have to wait till you've reached the 10th bhumi before you have the ability to help or deal with life, then I don't think that's what the text wants to say to us. I can have aspects of every single bhumi, including the 10th bhumi, in my life today and not have perfected them all. But I have aspects of them in my life. So if you read through the Dasabhumika Sutra, which I, of course, hope all of you do as part of the class, reading and dealing with the Dasabhumika, you can understand that we are each one of us individual in terms of how far we've advanced, how much we know, how much we don't know. And there's such a wealth of material, and there's such an enormous complexity to the Buddhist teaching that I feel I never will accomplish it all. But yet I love to do what I'm doing tonight. I love to go on teaching. Even if I haven't achieved such a degree that I'm an enlightened person, I'm not. And you just have to bear with me on that. But the fact that one takes a vow, I'm going to try to help people understand Buddhist teaching. And how do I do that? And I may do it imperfectly, may not be at all as good as it ought to be. I know that I fall far short of my goals very often. I sit here trying to write like the lecture tonight. I didn't feel really completely satisfied with the lecture. I've been working on it all day. Not that I was changing much, but it somehow I felt I wasn't yet saying everything that needed to be said. And finally, at 15 minutes before the class, I just gave up and said, okay, I have to teach now. Do I not teach the class because I didn't achieve everything I want? Or do I go ahead and try to give you as much as I can? And that, of course, is what I do. It's what we do. So I depend on all of you in many ways to help me. There are some of you who are monastics, who have deep training, who have abilities that are far beyond my own. And I appreciate your taking the course. It's wonderful to have you with us. And then I have others who ask the hard questions because they are things they don't know, but they know they don't know, and they ask the hard and right kind of questions. And we learn from questions. So I don't know that this answers what you are talking about, Shanshan, but we are in the midst of learning and teaching and living, and we use what we can and how we can do it the best. And sometimes we have to forgive ourselves. We have to forgive ourselves that we don't quite make it, but we forgive ourselves. Thank you for your question very much.
Thank you.
Reverend Kanjan, you have your hand up.
Yes, I have my hand up. Just a moment, making sure my computer doesn't turn off the power.
Oh,
I was asking about the translation. Have you read this translation by Bhiksu Dharma Mitra from Seattle? He just did a whole set of the Flower Adornment Sutra, and I was reading chapter 26, which he does as the 10 grounds. Have you read this one yet?
I have not.
Okay. I wanted to see how they compare, if you had any opinion on that. So
How about you? Have you had a chance to read that?
it's ironic that I just received it's a 3 volume set from one of my students. So I
Oh,
have not read it myself. So that's why.
yes, good. Well, thank you for that. Maybe you could put that up on the chat and tell everybody what's available.
I will. Thank you.
Anyone else have thoughts that have come up for them this evening? We also had a number of great questions submitted onto Moodle this week regarding the recorded lecture. A couple questions we've actually heard voiced this evening, but we could turn to those if we want to ask those questions in addition, or instead of relating to what we just heard.
The people who wrote the questions, please share your questions with the rest of the class, and let's see if we can deal with them. Or Chris, you can call on somebody.
Okay, let's see. Questions that were submitted, and who have we not heard from? Let's see. Let's see. Khan, you submitted a couple questions.
Yes, actually, my questions are mostly related to wisdoms. So I think as I was watching the video, I think Dr. Lancaster mentioned about teaching the indescribable. I mean, it's kind of interesting to me about if this is indescribable, how do you actually teach it, right? And so I sort of interpreted this as the true wisdom, which really cannot be taught, but only can be attained through practice or through other means. So this is less of a question, but more of a comment. But I would love to hear from Doctor about uh, what do you really mean by teaching the indescribable? Maybe you have a different perspective, which I didn't pick up from the video.
Well, as you know, and certainly I feel it, you can teach about something. You can teach about the indescribable. but that's not teaching the indescribable.
Right.
I think you can't teach the indescribable. You have to live it. Somehow that's the only way of expressing it. What other way do we have to express it? It's just living. And we have many things that are indescribable, or at least I think we do. How many of our thoughts we have never been able to voice to others? They're in us, but we don't have words for them. We don't have ways of saying them, but we live with them. We live those thoughts. So I think that it's an ongoing process, and that teaching is not the thing itself, but maybe learning is. When you learn something, then you don't necessarily need words. We learn through impressions. We learn through all kinds of inexplicable ways. So that's why I sometimes say I don't teach anything. It's impossible to teach. People learn, but I don't open up your head and pour in knowledge. Your knowledge coming through your ears from listening to my words is not what you learn. What you learn is strictly, completely within your own mental capacity, your mental activity. And that's what's so terribly important for all of us, is when we learn. And we don't always have to even try to tell it to others. We need to, first of all, learn how to live it. And it's that living which I think is so important, particularly today, given everything that's happened in the Los Angeles area. How do we live? How do we just keep on going? And we do. We have. But thank you for that comment. That it's worth a lot of more thought and a lot more than I can give you right now. But thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Well, Chris, I think I would like to have everybody either come up with a question and a reason for asking the question, or to do what we often do for fun, sort of, say what happened to you tonight.
Okay, I think that's a good idea. So those of you who maybe have a question in the pocket that you've submitted or are sitting on, now's your chance. You can also do as Dr. Lancaster suggested and reflect on what's happened to you this course, this class, this evening. Do I have a volunteer? Go first. Can I ask maybe Venerable Sanju? Do you oh, okay, we do have a volunteer. Michelle?
Here, I'll give the others time to formulate some questions. Um, this is a question that I posted in the forum, and it's why do you think the Buddha had others teach some of the sutras? Now, this is something that like I have some thoughts on because in the lecture you mentioned like Sariputra teaching the extended Prajnaparamita. But yeah, I'm interested in hearing like other people's thoughts on this particular matter.
Excellent question. Michelle, does anyone have thoughts on this? When you hear other people teaching, standing in for the Buddha, do you ask yourself why? Why is someone else teaching when you have the Buddha right here? Right? It's essentially the question.
Well, none of us will ever get to hear Shakyamuni's teaching directly from him unless you were there at a previous life. So we have to take it however we can get it.
Mhm.
And we have to that's why the texts are so important. And if you worry that maybe this text doesn't get it quite right, you try to read as many of the texts as you can until you can see a pattern of belief that is widespread in the text. And that's one way to help you say, at least I will listen to that. And if there is a single passage which seems to be separated from all the others, I may decide I don't know what to do with it. I don't do anything. But thank you. Your comments and insights are always welcome.
Thank you. I think that having others teach was like part of the Buddha's wisdom, probably in recognizing the impermanence of his own human life, and that if others were not like put in the position and kind of like pushed to teach, that the teachings would be lost when he passed away from his physical existence, kind of like how Venerable Master Xing Yun had many other venerables do a lot of work to open up temples around the world. Now, I'm sure that was something that he would have been capable of doing, but he understood that if he's the only one who knows how to open up a temple or to run a temple, that Bo Guanshan would have died with him. but because he had others and prepared them to take over even when they thought they weren't ready, that of course the system continues to live.
Good point. Reverend Kanjin, you've got your hand up.
From my experience, it's the relevance and practicality of the, the relevance of the Buddhist teaching in our life that is interesting because as a monk, I studied so many sutras since, 18 years old and became kind of a bookworm in it. And then meeting one of my teachers, he simply said, the Buddha's true intent was to have us in this life, within our own life to become awakened to some way to, alleviate suffering and unsatisfactoriness. So, that the questioning would become smaller. And then, as you had said, instead of removing oneself, entering in to that kind of interaction, because there are also sutras which say that because we are involved in the sutras, because we have some affinity with it, that we actually have heard it from the Buddha's own mouth in the past life. Some traditions think that way. And that's our kind of karmic connection with the teachings because these wonderful teachings are here, but many people don't take the time to listen to them, And when I'm practicing, within Sangha, it seems as, my teacher said, the practicality and the impact of the teaching is not just words, but as you said, this interaction and going into it rather than avoiding it, such as the realities that you share in your lecture, where most people would look for the sympathy or not knowing what to say or what to do, but the outlook that the Buddha gives us is the kind of freedom that we have. So that's many things I took from your lecture today that, of course, how do you say, solidify what my teachers have taught me as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Venerable, please.
Yes. These questions I posted in the forum. Actually, what is the significance of the sutra? Significance or origin of the sutra?
Well, I think the significance of any Buddhist text, including the Pali, one of the most significant things about them is that they have been preserved, that they have been memorized, they have been copied. Because if they hadn't, we wouldn't have them. But the fact that people throughout the centuries have found that there was enough in each of those remembered and copied texts to spend the time and effort to keep them alive is the significance, number first, significance of them. If there was no audience, they would have disappeared a long time ago. And I'm sure there are many teachings that have disappeared in Buddhism because there was no audience. In the sense, there was nobody to remember it or nobody who cared enough to remember what was said. These received texts I take seriously because whatever many people do over a long period of time, I think is very important. And I use that as a kind of a way of looking at things to see whether or not it's something I want to think about. And I say, well, if that many people for centuries have thought this was worth the effort, it's surely worth a little bit of my time too. And I think that that's what people feel in the Pali tradition, that the Sangha has kept it alive, and that the Sangha is just as important as the text, because the text needs the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Another volunteer. E, please.
If no one speaks, I'd like to share a bit. Michelle, I like LA, okay, so I'm attached to it. I used to live in Cleveland for 24 years and I can't deal with cold weather. Even now in LA, my fingers are numb. I'm getting old. But I would, because Dr. Lancaster touched on attachment. We attach to things, even for me as a monk. I live in a house. Like I'm thinking about, like, okay, how can I let go of this? If I let go of my house, okay, where do I stay? Who is going to support me as a monk? And it does not, is not feasible in America because we don't have individually or we don't have that support. And the thing is because I volunteer in the state prisons. So like if I let it go, then who is gonna, when I get older, how am I gonna get through it? So that's one thing. I just throw it out there. Second, I think we have a lot to learn from the folks inside the prisons because right now, we have 1.8 million people inside federal and state prisons and county jails. And it's projected to go up. But here's how they live their lives. They don't have attachment to their clothes. When they put their clothes to the washer to send their clothes to be washed, they would not get the shirt back, the same shirt or the same pant. Can we do that? Even for me as a monk, like could I wear another monk's clothes? They do get the same underwear and socks back, but in terms of clothing, they don't get the same clothes back after washed. They eat whatever the prisons provide. And since we are recording this, so I can't say, it's crap. So like for me, when I eat, I like to have, I'm at a stage where my body is a lot weaker. I like to have something organic. I eat veggies and I eat my own time. But the folks inside the prison, you have to wake up at 6 o'clock and walk to the chow hall. And you only have 5 minutes to sit down, and whatever food that they give you in the morning, they probably have a bit of oatmeal or cereal. And then your lunch is a brown bag with 4 pieces of bread, a green apple, a piece of turkey or ham, some flower seeds, and 2 cookies. That's every day, even if you're incarcerated for 40 years. I have run into people who have been in prison for 45 years, and that's what they eat every day. Chow hall dinner, they would also go to chow hall, and then whatever that the prisons provided, that's what they eat. In a way, their lifestyle is very parallel to our, the monastic lifestyle, except that we volunteer to live in the temple or to choose this lifestyle. The folks inside the prison, they are forced to live in that lifestyle. In a sense, they don't have the attachment to the clothes, to anything that is comfortable, that is good, that they do crave for freedom. They do crave for connection, especially to family. And the majority of them, I don't know the exact percentage, they don't have family anymore. So then, in a way, they turn to pen pals, or what do you call those, girlfriend or boyfriend things, which they could be manipulated. So that's, I just want to share with you guys, because 1.8 million people is a lot of people. If it's not just one, and it does affect, their mentality, it also affects us as a society. But this is where we are. I just thought that I'd like to share my thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable D, for the amount of time you spend doing prison visitation. I can't do it anymore, but I count it as one of the blessings of my life that I could do it for a short period of time and have that experience. Any of you who have some wishes to help in that regard, please think about it and do it. You're badly needed.
It's interesting to think about the attachment. You brought up people who are in a position where they're forced to have no attachments to the things that we usually do. Of course, those of us who are maybe hit by a natural disaster or some other such luck, this brings up to me this thing that you mentioned in your talk, Dr. Lancaster. The first thing we do is go out and replace it. We go shopping, or we go fill that void, that attachment again. And then we have this group who can't do that. It's an interesting dichotomy. And that's what stuck with me from your talk. There's many great points, but this idea that the first thing we turn to is that old vice, that thing that we've been warned against, that security blanket, perhaps. And if we were all just maybe a little bit more mindful, have that opportunity to pause and think about things, reflect on things, be more careful when we turn to that security again, and to replacing our attachments with perhaps more skillful versions.
Thank you, Chris.
Who haven't we heard from tonight? Can I call on some? Wei Yi?
Yes. I don't have a question I want to ask, but I just want to share something that just happened to me tonight. So tonight it's really quiet to me. It's the first night that my son can soothe himself back to sleep. And I remember last semester at the same time I had a class with Dr. Lancaster. I always mute myself and then turn off the camera because I always need to soothe my son all the time. And but this time it's a little bit different. I can stay here all the time, but I feel a little bit disappointed because he doesn't need me anymore. But before then, I feel like this is my son. I feel like I own my son or something like that because I delivered him or something. But tonight, it's the first time I feel like it's super quiet in this house and then I can really enjoy my class. Um, but after I heard the presentation from professor, I realized one thing. Um, you don't own anything, even this is your son or daughter or something. And it remember, it brought a quote from me. It's called "The thing you own ending up owning you." Just like my situation. At the beginning, I thought I own my son. This is my son, and then it ends up he start to take over my life or something like that. I thought this is not a good thing because it's kind of I lose myself a little bit. But since tonight, I realize I need to um, take a breath and really focus on myself and let go with something. It's really a big change since tonight. And after I heard this lecture, I realized I have to really pause a little bit and then don't be too stressful about me and my son or like our relationship. Just focus on our own life because my son right now, he's a really independent um, person, like a human. So um, yeah, I feel like tonight is really a big change for me. So this is one little things I just want to share. Yeah.
Yeah, as a parent, I think I can say with you're so happy to see your child advance and learn something new. But it's a bittersweet moment because when they've learned something new, they're not so dependent on you. And you it's like you pay a price. And the price is that you let them have their time, their life, while you still love them and still care for them.
Yeah. Because I remember last semester, I'm still in nursery. I need to feed him, but like this semester, he doesn't even need me to soothe him anymore. So it's
Yes.
kind of like, yeah, but the good thing is I have more time to focus on my school, my own time. Yeah.
Really, thank you for sharing that. That's quite meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you guys for listening.
Okay, let's see. So, few minutes left of class, and I think only two more people we haven't heard from this evening. Shall we flip a coin or Sunny? Okay. Um,
I think it's like class. Think about like two of the experience I have and how like when you're attached to, let's say, things, depending on the conditions, your attachment can let go really quickly or you can be more attached. And two of them, I think one of it was like I had this package that was delivered to my house. It was a little bit more expensive than the other ones. It was about like $200, and I don't usually order anything that expensive, but it got like pirate porch and just got stolen. And I was very, very upset. So I tracked down like the the CCTV and found out who the person is. I didn't end up like just like going to that person and asking it back because I thought it was like it would be like too dangerous, but I was like really, really upset. And I was like upset for like 6 months, even though I never really received that package. And I don't really think that after a lot of time that package itself was even that important. It was just like the fact that it was stolen, like my thing was stolen from me. I was so upset. But then I think about this other experience, like when COVID started, I was still a student that time and I was basically kicked out of student housing, so you cannot stay. Even if I was like I lived in a student apartment, I was the only one there, but the school was like, you have to leave. And at that time, because because I didn't have anywhere to go, I had to go home, right? So, but it was really hard to buy plane tickets that time. And at that moment, I was like, you know what? I don't want any of my stuff. I can just leave it here and the school can just take care of it and I can just like leave like just myself, even without any luggage. And I just think how like I can have like when the situation changes, I can have my entire apartment, which I literally don't care about anything inside, versus I have this package where I think someone stole it from me and I was like so upset for 6 months. So I think like when we have attachment to things, it's not really about the thing itself, but it's like how we feel about that thing. And as different conditions like formulate how attached we are to the items itself. Yeah.
Thank you, Sunny. Sorry your package got taken.
Thank you, Sunny. Yeah, I can sympathize with that sometimes. I think it's just the feeling that's more attached, has more of an attachment to than the thing itself. I like the way it makes me feel when I'm mad that something didn't go my way, or I'm glad that something did, and it's really an insignificant object or something. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. Yvonne.
Yeah, so I was just, I don't know if we have the time because we've only got 4 minutes left. I think it was one of the students that raised the questions about the learning, about the light. And I was just thinking, like, I know, like, just in reading some of the sutra, some of the historical figures, they were talking about obviously the Dharma cannot be taught, right? And then they're talking about the fun, their teacher passing down the teaching, just I guess not through words, but somehow it's almost like mystical or magical that the Dharma transmission. So yeah, so I'm just, I just wondering what that is all about. Yeah. Just that Dharma transitions without being like physically any type of teachings, but like for instance, I don't remember. I think was it I think I might said the wrong thing, like the fifth Pratarg passing down to the sixth Pratarg, and then of the Platform Sutra, right? And then the person wasn't educated at all, but all of a sudden you can just magically transmit the Dharma, and that person just fully got enlightened. So
No, I think I do believe that Buddhism asks us to be really honest and to say what we really believe and think. And not everybody who is a teacher is going to be a teacher for everybody. That's for sure, myself included. So we need to, I think we all, I'll put it another way. I think we all have those moments when being with somebody is very meaningful. Whether we're talking or whether we're interacting. When I first started to meditate in Los Angeles 70 years ago, there was one woman, if she came to the meditation session, it was so much better. She never said anything. I never talked to her. And yet she really influenced my life just by her presence. And I can't tell you why, what power she had. I think it was the power of concentration, that if you're with somebody who's really concentrating, you know it, you feel it, you're there. So I understand what your comment is, and I think you just become as sensitive as you can to the power and presence of others as to whether they're toxic or whether they're healing, helpful, enlightening.
Thank you, Professor.